You're listening to Packers Talk Network.
You're listening to No Huddle Radio on the Packers Talk Radio Network, your home for in-depth and thoughtful Packers analysis. I'm your host, Gil Martin. My co-host is my good friend, Sean Tehan. And in addition to this show, I write for the PackersPost.com and Cheesehead TV. And Sean was a TV sportscaster in Minnesota. We're all here to talk Packers because you're all here for one thing, and that's a love for Green Bay football. Sean, hard to believe how quickly things move now. But, you know, it's like we're just a week away from all that testing and all of that, draft picks being graded and doing all the dashes. Mm-hmm. And the combine is right around the corner. I can't believe how quickly things move.
Yeah, and then after the combine, we have mini camp, and then we have training camp, and then we finally have the regular season. And for those gearing up for the 2025 Packers season, a few words about our sponsor, Wisconsin's own Ticket King. For over 30 years, Ticket King has been providing Packers tickets to Packer fans. You can find them on the web at theticketking.com or visit their locations in Green Bay and Milwaukee. For direct links to specific Packers game tickets, go to packerstalk.com/tickets or browse their website at theticketking.com. You can see right there on your screen if you're following with us on YouTube today. And you can watch every episode of No Huddle Radio on Packers Talk Network on YouTube. Click on the bell, turn the notifications on. You can join the discussion. Chat with Gil and us live. We love to see and talk about the comments coming our way and just talking Packer football in general.
Always fun to talk Packers football with fans and viewers, and it's a good time. We definitely do enjoy it. And, it's getting to be also that time of year where franchise tags may become an issue.
Yeah, and we're going to be grading the offensive line in the middle and the bulk of this episode, but there is one of those offensive linemen who primarily played this year who is under consideration possibly for that franchise tag, something the Packers don't usually do. They've only used it a few times throughout their franchise history, and most notably, they used it for Devontae Adams. He was traded less than a couple weeks later to the Vegas Raiders for a couple premium draft picks, and now you got some free agents. Obviously, every year you have free agents, but not really huge worries at free agency for the Packers right now, but there are some candidates for that franchise tag. Franchise tag window did open on Tuesday for NFL teams. They have until March 4th to use it or not. And the big question is, Gil, should the Packers consider using the franchise tag? There's a guy like center Josh Myers, kicker Brandon McManus, who could be under consideration. Maybe defensive tackle TJ Slayton. These are just probably the most prominent guys who could be under consideration of that, but should the Packers consider using the franchise tag, which is obviously a very hefty price to pay for essentially a one-year deal? I'm going to let you start off with this discussion, though, because I obviously have my take, and I want to hear your take, though, first.
My opinion is generally it should be a last resort, and yep. I would prefer that they not use it. I don't think, those three players that you mentioned may be the leading candidates. Yeah. But I don't think any of them really justify the franchise tag. And out of those three, there is one that if push came to shove and this player was going to walk out the door, I might use the franchise tag on him. But the other two, I would really hesitate.
And for me, and obviously it's a good little tease there, Gil, because I'm curious to hear which one you would use the franchise tag on. But right now, the projection is the salary cap. It's increasing from 2024 to 2025 by about 22 to 26 million or so. But obviously, a lot of money's going to be kicking in with the Xavier McKinney contract, the deal that he signed last offseason with the Packers. But the franchise tag values per over the cap, the projection there, and again, this is just a projection. It's not a hard number yet because we don't know the salary cap number exactly as of today for 2025. But the offensive line position, it could be a franchise tag hit of about $25.2 billion for a one-year deal. Kicker, punter, $6.5 million. Defensive tackle, you're talking about in the $20 million range. And you have a guy like Brandon McManus, and I think that's where you're going, Gil, who may be worthy of that franchise tag.
Yeah, out of the three, he would be the one that I would be willing to use it as a last resort. And I think the Packers could probably sign McManus to a 2 or 3 year deal, spread out the signing bonus, give him money up front, and that's a win-win for player and team. But, if he's going to walk out the door, I would consider using the franchise tag on him. Only if, the relationship between player and team is not so damaged by the negotiations that he'll be unhappy coming back. Yeah. You don't want, a cancer in your locker room, so to speak. But the numbers that you were tossing about, and again, like you said, those are projected numbers. That's way too high in my mind, for either TJ Slayton or Josh Myers. I'm just not prepared to do that.
Yeah, and right now for McManus's case, the highest paid kickers in football right now on a per year basis, and this is according to Spot Track over the cap, the numbers are pretty close in these areas where Harrison Butker, the Chiefs kicker, he's making about $6.4 million per year. Jake Elliott, Super Bowl winning kicker from the Philadelphia Eagles, making $6 million per year. Matt Gabe, the Indianapolis Colts, $5.6 million a year. Cameron Dicker, the kicker from the LA Chargers, $5.5 million per year. And with Brandon McManus, you're talking about a kicker who only missed one kick during the regular season. He did have the miss in Philly, but outside of that, he was damn near perfect, man. Like, he was that good where if push came to shove and you couldn't get some kind of extension done before unrestricted free agency opened up, I would use the tag on Brandon McManus for sure, because for me, I'd be like, you know what, $6.5 million for a guy who was maybe the best kicker last year in football outside of couple guys, possibly. Yeah, I think I would be okay paying a 1-year deal for that. But yeah, Josh Myers, though, is a guy who he's shown so much promise, and we're going to get into Josh Myers in a bit with our offensive line grades and everything, but a guy who has shown promise at times, but then just has games where he just can't get out of his own way. And he just mentally just seems to be really frazzled and everything. Seems like a great guy, but not a guy that I want to pay $25 million a year to, especially given the fact that Creed Humphrey, the Chiefs center, is the highest paid center in football, making about $18 million a year. Yeah, $25 million a year for a 1 year, $25 million for a 1-year deal for Josh Myers. Not for me.
No, I mean, you could sign probably 2 or 3 guys who could probably give you comparable performance to Josh Myers for that kind of money. And that's the issue. It's value, and it's only a 1-year deal. And if the Packers can't work out an extension with Josh Myers, if they want to bring him back, and we still don't know where that, how strong that desire is, but I can guarantee you that any deal that is reached is not going to be worth $20 million a year over the life of the contract.
And you got to also consider too, whenever these franchise tags are placed on players, where these are guys where these teams do not want to let them out the door. And if they do let them out the door, they're going to get a nice return. When Davante Adams was tagged, didn't want to come back to Green Bay. So the Packers said, well, we're going to make sure we get something for you. And at the time, Davante Adams, best receiver in the game. He's still, in my opinion, he's still one of the better receivers in all of football. But they weren't going to let him walk away for free. A guy like Josh Myers, a guy like TJ Slayton, if you don't tag those kind of guys, because the return is not going to be great. And that's, like you said, Gil, it's money that is better off being spent elsewhere. Where with Davante Adams, it's like, yeah, like I'm willing to pay that guy fully guaranteed money, top of the market money for a wide receiver, because he's the best of the best. And Brandon McManus is definitely in the conversation there for a kicker as well. Yeah, I wouldn't expect a high draft pick for him in return, but I would expect a future extension outside of that, especially if he keeps kicking as well as he did in his first year in Green Bay.
Yeah, and I'll take it a step further with Josh Myers, and this is not to disrespect him, because I do like what he brings to the table, but I don't even know if I would give Josh Myers the $10 million a year for 3 years that John Runyon got last year, let alone $20 million a year for 1 year as part of a franchise tag. It just doesn't, the performance doesn't justify the salary in that case.
And the top 5 highest paid centers in football right now, we mentioned Creed Humphrey, Frank Ragnow of Detroit's making about $13.5 million a year. Lloyd Cushenberry from the Titans making about $12.5 million. Ryan Kelly of the Colts, $12.4 million. Eric McCoy of the Saints, $12 million. Yeah, you offer Josh Myers $10 million a year, he's going to be a top 10 paid center. It just, I think we talked about this a few episodes ago and earlier too, where with Josh Myers, he's a guy who, if he agrees to a deal for about $6-7 million, maybe even $8 million, maybe.
Maybe.
I could stomach that. And the thing is, the $8 million deal, it would have to be very little guarantees and a contract that you could get out of at any time, really, without any major repercussions. It's got to be a really team-friendly contract with a lot of incentives that are player-driven. But outside of that, no, it's not worth paying more than that for a guy like Josh Myers. Even though well-respected, well-liked guy in that locker room, business is business.
Yeah, but not $20 million a year liked. So.
Yeah, for sure. And speaking of Josh Myers, today we're grading the Packers offensive line from 2024, a group that overall was pretty good, Gil. And they had some moments where they were very sloppy when it came to penalties, there were some sloppy moments in general with this team, but a group that stayed relatively healthy overall this year. I think this unit was probably the best position group on the Packers offense this year. This is a top 15 unit in pocket time allowed, pressure rate. They allowed the second fewest total sacks this season. Packer ball carriers averaged 4.7 yards per carry this year. That was tied for sixth best in the NFL. This is an offensive line that got to play a lot of football together for the most part, which is a huge positive for this group. But obviously the playoff game hit. They had some significant injuries along the front, mainly to Elton Jenkins, and the offensive line just kind of lost their way in that playoff game at Philadelphia against the eventual Super Bowl champion Eagles. But let's start out with the first round rookie draft pick from last year, Jordan Morgan. He was slated to look like to be a starter right away, but he was dealing with a shoulder issue in training camp. And then he dealt with the same shoulder issues during the season. He only played 6 games this year in his rookie year. He was placed on season-ending IR, started 1 game, and that was against Detroit when they didn't have Josh Myers at Lambeau Field. Committed 1 penalty this year, 0.5% penalty rate. A guy who I think a lot of people are thinking, oh, the Packers should have drafted Cooper DeJean instead of this guy. What were they doing? But I don't think that's very fair. It's just he caught the injury bug, and I think it was just more bad luck more than anything for him and just unfortunate injury luck. Gil, what's your grade for Jordan Morgan from his first season?
Yeah, I mean, look, he had a difficult assignment because he's switching from left tackle in college to right guard in the NFL. So in addition to changing sides of the field, you're moving from the perimeter to the interior, and you're adjusting from college to the NFL. So that's a lot of stuff to get used to. And then he gets injured, and it cost him time in training camp, and it cost him time during the regular season. I gave him a C, mostly because, it was there really wasn't enough information to say what he's going to become and where he's at. He started that 1 game. Besides that, he kind of alternated series with Sean Ryan at right guard. I think he's still learning. He's got a lot to learn. The performance was kind of average based on the limited number of snaps we saw. That's why I went with the C.
Yeah, for me, I was a little more bullish on him. I went with a B- for Jordan Morgan. I do think he's going to be a nice player, and I think he was ready to start right away. But again, the injury bug just kind of hit, and then Sean Ryan took control of the right guard spot. And even when Jordan Morgan was coming back from his shoulder issues, he was still rotating in there. He was still getting action. I think the Packers think very highly of him. Yeah, he's a big guy. He's got some big hands. He's got friggin' bear claws, man. Like this dude's humongous. I think he's a good athlete. I think he's going to be a good player. I think B- is fair, just because it's a matter of I think the talent is there, but he didn't show enough to really give a higher grade. But I do I'm more bullish on him than a lot of people are, and this is just the draft industrial complex that's feeding into our minds like crazy. Where the Packers didn't get Cooper DeJean, but guess what? They got Edgerrin Cooper a few picks after the Eagles selected Cooper DeJean, and it looks like it's going to work out for Green Bay just fine. It's working out for the Eagles, obviously, just fine. But with Jordan Morgan, though, I think there's a lot of upside there and a lot of talent, and we just haven't seen it yet. But he's going to get probably an opportunity sooner rather than later.
Yeah, and I'm also bullish on his future. I was just grading him based on what he did in very limited snaps as a rookie. I think he will start next season if he's healthy, and cross my fingers on that. But, I think he does have the potential to be a long-term starter on this offensive line. I just need to see it.
Yep, that's for sure. And he even if he wasn't going to say it's still, I think it just says so much to me that he was even getting in games, even though there was so much continuity along the offensive line this year, where I think that says a lot about where he's going or where the Packers believe he's going as a player. But the guy who primarily played right guard this year, Sean Ryan, started every game at right guard in 2024, including the playoffs, committed 6 penalties on the year, 0.6% penalty rate, really great run blocker. I think he improved greatly in pass pro. Gil, what's your grade for Sean Ryan, a guy who seems to just be taking strides especially since his rookie year, a rookie year that was really rough where he had a 6-game suspension, only played 1 snap, and that was on special teams. What's your grade for Sean Ryan from the 2024 season?
I gave Sean Ryan a B-. I like his growth. I like the toughness and grit that he adds, the attitude that he brings to the offensive line. He is physical. He takes no BS from anybody. And, he adds a certain toughness. He does need to improve a little bit in pass protection. I think he did take a lot of strides. In fact, ironically, his PFF grade was higher as a pass protector than as a run blocker, although I don't necessarily agree with those, with all of that analysis. But I think he's a up-and-coming guy who is continuing to grow. And I still think he has not yet reached his full potential, that we will still see better from a healthy Sean Ryan next year if he retains a starting spot.
So I gave Jordan Morgan a B-, and I thought Sean Ryan was better than Jordan Morgan. And that was the main competition in training camp leading up to the 2024 season. So I gave him a slightly higher grade. I gave him a B. This is a guy who just wrapped up his 3rd year, though. And I really think of all the linemen on the Packers, the offensive line group in general, I think he took the biggest leap this year. I really do, where he's a guy where I thought he was maybe a lost cause as a rookie. He didn't even get to see the field. And then even when he was in 2023, when he was rotating with John Ryan, where very good run blocker, like you said, Gil, struggled mightily in pass protection, but he definitely got better in that area. And it's got to be an emphasis that the coach has had for him and maybe for himself too when training. He seemed like a completely different player compared to 2023. Now he is eligible for a new contract. He just wrapped up his 3rd season. And I wonder, Gil, I think he's trending upwards, where if it were me, if I'm Brian Gutekunst, I think I'm trying to get a deal done with him, an extension done, another contract done with Sean Ryan, because if he takes another big leap like he did from 2023 to 2024, he's going to get expensive. So you may want to lock this kid up sooner rather than later. I don't know what your thoughts are, but that's just where I'm thinking where this guy's trending up. Lock him up sooner rather than later because it's not going to get cheaper for him.
I'd be open to it, but I have other guys in that same boat who I would prioritize ahead of Sean Ryan.
And you got to wonder, too, where the draft could have a huge impact, too. If they draft an offensive lineman with with a premium draft pick, that could definitely change the formula as well.
Well, now, see, that becomes, for me, a chicken and egg thing. Because if you try to open up negotiations with Sean Ryan and some of the other offensive linemen who are eligible for extensions, and they're nowhere near your number and your term, then maybe you have to draft somebody where hey, I might lose 1 or 2 or 3 of these starters because their contract is up. That means you got to spend more draft capital earlier in the draft to replace potentially those guys.
Got to tread lightly when it comes to contract negotiations, man. That's why we're here, and that's why we're not in the Packers front office, because I think my philosophy would definitely blow up in my face. But speaking of contract negotiations, obviously, center Josh Myers, we were talking about him just earlier in this episode. He's up for a new contract, set to be an unrestricted free agent. He missed 1 game in 2024, including the playoffs. Only game he missed was against Detroit at Lambeau Field, where clearly was missed at that center position because they really did not play well in that soaker at Lambeau Field back in November. Committed 3 penalties over the year, a 0.3% penalty rate. Not terrible there, but really this is a guy who is the most up and down player of this group. He had some great moments and some great games, then had other times where he was just a complete liability and just turned out a total clunker. Just kind of a volatile player, Gil. What's your grade for Josh Myers from 2024?
I gave him a C+, and I like Josh Myers. I like his intangibles. He's intelligent. He is a hard worker. but it, like you said, inconsistent. When he's on, he's really good. And I think the change in the way they run the football to going in between the tackles and probably double teaming players to open up that initial hole for Josh Jacobs, I think that played more to Josh Myers' strengths as a run blocker.
Mm-hmm.
But when he fails, he doesn't just fail, he fails spectacularly.
Yeah.
And, you'll see those replays where, oh, there's a guy flying in the wrong direction. Oh, that's Josh Myers, and
Yeah.
It's frustrating because when you see him play well, you want to see that not all the time, but on a consistent basis. And he just hasn't given it to me. So I think he's a pretty good player. PFF hates him for whatever reason. They rank him very close to the bottom of all rated centers. I don't think he's that bad, but I think that you can upgrade this position because I think he's sort of, pretty good, like average, but not spectacular.
Yeah, I would have given a C+ as well, Gil, but that Detroit game, when they played at Lambeau Field, there were so many issues with Elton Jenkins at center, and Josh Myers seemed to be kind of the glue that kind of put the offensive line together, per se. And for that, I gave him a B-. I gave him slightly higher than you just because he clearly was important. He clearly had he knew how to run the show along the offensive line. But like you said, when he failed spectacularly. Where the game he played against Detroit at Ford Field, he was terrible. He was a complete liability that game against a decimated Detroit Lions defense. A Packers offense that still put up 31 points. But yeah, if he agrees to a team-friendly contract with little guarantees, I'm open to having him back. But I think the Packers are going to be in the business of trying to improve this spot and not wasting extra money here where maybe they've just kind of reached the plateau for Josh Myers and what he could do here. I think he's a terrific guy. He was playing with a heavy heart all year after he lost his dad during training camp. Jordan Love loves him. A lot of guys, the coaches, the players, they love him. Coaches always talk glowingly of him, but a B-, I think it's a fair grade, but I think C+ is definitely fair too. The B- though, I just gave a little higher just because the void he clearly left in that one game he missed.
Let me ask you one thing. Do you think that there is another, can he take his game up another level, or is Josh Myers what he is at this point?
I think he's more what he is at this point, and that's why I'm more in line with possibly moving on from him and trying something new at center, unless you get a really, really good deal, unless you get a deal where you can get out of it if you find a better guy to play center for you. But I will say with Josh Myers, man, that guy's a pure football dude because, hey, he puked on a football and kept the play going. What was that, against the Indianapolis Colts in week 2? Remember that? I mean, that's the definition of puke and rally. So Josh Myers will always have that in Packers fans' minds going forward. It's like, yeah, true football player right there. So let's move on though. Left tackle, Rasheed Walker. And Rasheed Walker is a guy who he's really good, but he can be really sloppy. He committed 10 penalties this year, just under a 1% penalty rate. He committed 9 penalties in 2023. This has kind of been an overarching theme since he took over the left tackle spot after David Bakhtiari was lost for the season after the season opener in 2023 in Chicago. Didn't miss one game in 2024, including the playoffs. I think he's a solid pass protector. Overall, a decent left tackle. I think a lot of teams would take him as their left tackle over their current guys right now. But there's a lot of sloppiness, though, Gil, where he gets away from the fundamentals, and it can kind of bite him in the butt and kind of bites the backers in the butt way too often. What's your grade for Rasheed Walker for 2024?
I gave him a B, and the most important thing for a left tackle is protecting the blind side of your quarterback. And I think Rasheed Walker did a really good job of protecting the blind side of the quarterback. Yes, he does take too many penalties. I think there may be some concentration issues with regard to that. And his run blocking is average, I would say, at best. He is not a great run blocker. I like his run blocking better than PFF, but again, that's subjective largely. But I love where he's come from, where he was a seventh round pick, played 4 snaps on special teams as a rookie, then filled in when Bakhtiari went down and has been growing as a player. First half of that first year, 2023, when he was playing, he really struggled with double moves and then he improved and he worked. And I just like the way he has climbed from seventh round pick to solid starting left tackle. So, I mean, is he an all-pro or a Pro Bowl guy? No. Do I think he could still get better next year? A little bit, yeah. But like you said, there are plenty of teams who would sign up to get Rasheed Walker to be their left tackle.
And he's a guy who was at Penn State who he was a first, second round talent, but he had some injury issues. He possibly was never going to play football again after college. And the Packers scooped him up in round 7 to see what they can get out of him. The sloppiness is a big issue. That's a big concern of mine for sure. I do think he's gotten a lot better, especially since the 2023 game when they played at Vegas against the Raiders. And Max Crosby just took him to school all night long. It just ran an absolute clinic on Rasheed Walker on Monday Night Football. I was there in person. He was just, his hands are full. He just couldn't get out of his own way. And then I remember Yosh Nijman started at left tackle in 2023 in their home game against the Rams. The Rams team, luckily, that was starting Brett Rippon at quarterback. Yeah. And Matt Stafford wasn't available that day. And Yosh Nijman struggled. And Rasheed Walker was pulled from the lineup. But you can see where it's like, Rasheed Walker's the better option. Rasheed Walker took over week 10 of 2023, and he's never given up that job for a reason because he has gotten better. But because of the sloppiness, my grade is not as high as yours, Gil. I gave him a B-. It's just the penalties are so killer, and it happened way too often, especially the first game of the year against Philly. That was a big problem. And guess what? Philly's the team that you got to beat if you're going to go to the Super Bowl. Yeah. You got to know how to block those dudes up front, and they got a lot of good football players up front on that defensive line in Philly. It's just a little bit too sloppy, but I like the direction he's heading. He's also eligible for a new contract too. It's worth considering for sure.
Yeah.
So yeah, we'll see what happens with Rasheed Walker going forward. I think the draft will be very dependent on that. Packers have some tough decisions definitely to make along the offensive line going forward. But let's go to the right side. Right tackle Zach Tom didn't miss one game in 2024, including the playoffs. I like to think of him as baby Bakhtiari. Similar in height and weight, tremendous footwork, smart football player. Pro Football Focus named him to their all-pro first team. Committed 5 penalties this year. 4 of those were false starts. The other one was an illegal formation. Overall, pre-snap mental mistakes. Other than that, play in and play out, he was just fantastic. He's also eligible for a contract extension. I think you and I both agree, Gil, that if you're going to lock up any of these guys who are eligible for contracts, this is the guy to get locked up ASAP. What's your grade for Zach Tom from 2024?
Yeah, I gave Zach Tom an A-. I just think, look, he was the team's best run blocker as far as PFF grade went. He's a great pass blocker. Here is a guy who ideally scouts would say, we want someone bigger to play right tackle.
Like Bakhtiari.
Yeah, but he's such a good technician. He knows where to be. He uses his hands well, his feet well, and he's just really smart and really hardworking. And, for a 4th-round pick to be graded in the top 10% of all PFF players at the position, hats off to Zach Tom.
Yeah, Zach Tom gets an A for me because he was by far their best offensive lineman this year, in my opinion. This guy is so good, and the tackle money ain't getting lower. So it's a matter where if you can't, I'm telling you, where it's like we were talking about franchise tags and whether or not the Packers should use it. If the Packers can't get an agreement with Zach Tom before next offseason, this is a guy that you have to franchise tag because he's that good. There's a reason why good offensive linemen don't hit the market. It's because they're way too valuable. This guy's way too valuable. He was a little bit exposed with the speed of Nolan Smith in the NFC wildcard loss at Philadelphia, but outside of that, this guy's so good. Like you said, so smart, such a good technician, fundamentally so sound. It is David Bakhtiari. It is David Bakhtiari just on the right side. I wouldn't be surprised, Gil, if there's a lot of talk of him possibly moving to center if they do move on from Josh Myers, but what if they consider moving him to left tackle if they decide to move on from Rasheed Walker in a couple of years?
He can play all 5 positions. He can play all 5 positions along the line and probably do them pretty well. So, but I think he's so valuable at tackle. And the other thing is he wants to be paid as a tackle. So
tackles get a lot more money.
Exactly. So that would be, I think, the biggest obstacle to moving him. He might be willing to do it if you keep paying him as a tackle, but that doesn't make sense for the Packers because then they have to pay another tackle. So,
Yeah, he, you know what? If he's good at tackle, just don't mess around. Just keep him at tackle.
Yep.
And lastly, we have the veteran of this group, Elton Jenkins. Didn't miss a regular season game. He missed most of that wild card loss at Philly due to a stinger suffered earlier in the game as he was a pulling guard on a play. Committed 9 penalties this year. That was a bit rough. 0.8% penalty rate. It's the most penalties he's committed since his rookie season when he had 10. Penalty rate wasn't good, but he struggled at center at home against Detroit. When Josh Byers wasn't able to play, but the void he left at left guard when he left that Philadelphia game was so critical. It was such a circus at left guard after he left that game, Gil. Clearly an important player along that offensive line for the Packers in 2024. What's your grade for Elton Jenkins for 2024?
Elton Jenkins, to me, a B+. Solid, smart, hardworking, versatile. Yeah, the penalties were up a little bit. You didn't like to see that. But, boy, when he was missing in that playoff game, offensive line is a weak link kind of a position where you could have 4 really great linemen, and if you have one guy who's struggling, the defense will take advantage of that and disrupt your whole offense. We saw how important Elton Jenkins is when he was unavailable in that playoff game. And yeah, the Eagles may have one of the better defensive lines in the NFL, but it was like men playing against boys after Jenkins left.
When he left that game, it was such a drop-off on the O-line. It was just such an issue.
The game was almost over at that point.
Yeah, Travis Glover was clearly not ready for that moment. Kadeem Telford wasn't really ready for that moment. And that's not a knock on them. It's just Philadelphia's D-line is the cream of the crop. Elton Jenkins is cream of the crop when it comes to left guard. Just a great football player and a guy who I'm glad the Packers extended when they did. He's such an important player, such an important piece along that O-line. Big Elton Jenkins guy. I wear his jersey every game day now. Now that Dave Bakhtiari is gone, possibly retired at this point. But Elton Jenkins is my guy. I gave him a B+ as well. So I agree with you there, Gil. Other grades that were incomplete or other offensive linemen that were incomplete include Kadeem Telford, rookie center Jacob Monk, veteran offensive tackle Andre Dillard, and rookie Travis Glover. They all did not get enough regular season snaps. That's where it's like that Elton Jenkins injury was so significant because the Packers really only played 6 offensive linemen all year. And then as soon as the playoffs roll around, of course, they have a significant injury along that O-line, and the depth clearly, the lack of depth clearly was an issue. But those 4 players received an incomplete. And then, Gil, what articles do you have coming up on Packers Post Cheesehead TV? We're going to get some trivia in just a bit. But what do you got cooking so far this offseason with the franchise tag window open up and the combine just around the corner?
Well, it's ironic because for the Packers Post, I have an article basically talking about both of the offensive tackles, the starting offensive tackles, being up for an extension this offseason and what, how that's going to affect the draft and how the Packers should proceed with that situation. So kind of timely with what we're talking about today. And then for Cheesehead TV, I talked about the guy that I consider the wild card in the Packers defensive line, and that's Brenton Cox Jr., who I think has the potential to take on a much bigger role next year, but he's still got to go out and prove it.
He had about 1.5 years of having the red shirt on, and then he got to play a little bit, and you can see the talents there with Brenton Cox Jr. It's just a matter of just polishing it up and kind of putting it all together. And good thing the Packers have a good defensive coordinator now leading the way because I think he's going to help them get there. Gil, you ready for some trivia?
Let's do it.
Well, at the top of this episode, we talked about the NFL's franchise tag window officially opening up on Tuesday. Last time the Packers used the tag on a player was Davante Adams back in 2022. 9 days later, the Packers traded Adams to the Vegas Raiders for a couple of premium draft picks in 2022. Now, the Packers have only used the franchise tag 5 times in franchise history. And Gil, besides Adams, who is the only other former Packer to receive the franchise tag and be traded after being tagged?
Wow. Offense or defense?
Defense.
Defense.
Yeah, it's one you got to think about a little bit, but then I'll tell you and you'll be like, oh, yeah, that makes sense.
I'm going to think that it is a defensive lineman or an edge rusher.
It's a defensive lineman, yes.
Okay.
He was on the 2007 team that almost went to the Super Bowl.
Okay, on the 2007 team that almost went to the Super Bowl.
The wheels are in motion in Gil's brain. I can just the monkey's moving. The monkey's banging the tambourine right now.
KGB.
Not KGB, no, but good guess. It's actually defensive tackle Corey Williams. The Packers tagged the former D tackle in March of the 2008 offseason. But that was a month which was overshadowed by the retirement of legendary Packers quarterback Brett Favre. Williams is a former 6th-round pick by the Packers in the 2004 NFL draft. He was coming off of 2 straight 7-sack seasons with the Packers and a 2007 season where the Packers are so close to a Super Bowl appearance after they lost at home in the NFC Championship game to the eventual Super Bowl champion New York Giants. The Packers traded Williams to the Cleveland Browns for a 2nd-round pick, and it proved to be the right move in the end. Williams never amassed more than 4 sacks in a single season after his departure. And Gil, for some bonus trivia, actually, who did the Packers select with the Browns' 2nd-round draft pick in the 2008 NFL draft? Keep in mind, Aaron Rodgers was set to become the starter for the first time because Favre at this point was retired.
Right. So based on what you're saying, it's got to be a quarterback.
Yep.
And based on that, it's got to be Brian Brom.
You nailed it. Quarterback Brian Brom. Like you said, they were moving on to Aaron Rodgers after Favre's first official retirement announcement of his NFL career. Brom was a star at Louisville, and if he had entered the NFL draft a year earlier, he was projected to be the potential top pick of the 2007 draft, where LSU quarterback Jamarcus Russell was the first overall pick in 2007 by the Raiders. That was followed immediately by future Hall of Famers Calvin Johnson and Joe Thomas, and Brom never registered one official snap as a Green Bay Packer. He appeared in 3 games in his entire NFL career. All 3 games were with the Buffalo Bills in 2009 and 2010. Played only 51.9% of his passes for 252 yards and threw 5 interceptions. And I was looking at the 2007 draft, Gil. It was pretty loaded. There were also soon-to-be Hall of Famer Adrian Peterson, Hall of Famers Patrick Wills and Darrelle Revis, Marshawn Lynch, Joe Staley, Lamar Woodley. Green Bay drafted Justin Harrell in round 1 that season, but they did find some key pieces of their 2010 Super Bowl team, drafting Brandon Jackson in round 2, James Jones in round 3, Desmond Bishop in round 6, and also Packers all-time leading scorer Mason Crosby in round 6. So overall, a decent draft for the Packers. Now, do you know who the other 3 guys who had been previously tagged by the Packers were?
No, not off the top of my head.
That's all right, because I'm not quizzing you this time. So that was Dorsey Levens, Antonio Freeman, and Ryan Pickett. Nice. All those 3 players got extensions shortly after receiving the franchise tag. So yeah, a lot of franchise tag trivia today, Gil. It's in light of franchise tagging season.
There you go.
So yeah, and hey, for Endless Packers Talk, and you have any trivia suggestions, anything like that, click the bell on YouTube, turn the notifications on. You can also email us at gbpackerssean@gmail.com. Read Gil's stuff at the Packers Post, She Said TV. Gil, get us out of here. I'm done talking for the day. So we're not getting any closer to the regular season with me yapping all day.
No problem. That's it for today. We'll be right back here next week. Follow us on Twitter at Gil Packers and at gbpackerssean. Stay up to date on all things Packers or to ask us questions. Or, as Sean said, you can email us at gbpackerssean@gmail.com. Make sure you're subscribed to Packers Talk on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Big thanks to PackersTalk.com for powering our show, and thank you for listening. Till next time, go Pack Go!
Go Pack Go!